Okay. It's time to do another painting. Ready? Oh, I just realized. I gotta mute my microphone. Okay, welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we are going to be looking at the art of Emily Carr. Emily Carr is the most famous Canadian artist of all time, perhaps only rivaled by Tom Thompson and members of the Group of Seven like A.Y. Jackson and Lauren Harris, and maybe a handful of other artists that are much more contemporary, some that are still alive. But I mean, the most prestigious art university in Canada is named after Emily Carr, and also where I happen to teach. And she's had a profound effect not only on art in Canada and abroad, but as well as she was kind of an early proto-environmentalist and animal rights advocate, as well as one of the first persons to really take up the cause of Indigenous rights and to celebrate the culture of the first people who lived in Canada for tens of thousands of years before white settlers arrived. So this is the painting we're going to recreate, Mrs. Jones' Farm from 1938. It is a painting that she made towards the end of her career, towards the end of her life. She died 7 years after this painting was completed. And really, this is, she kind of painted in relative obscurity for most of her life. And this is right before she achieves recognition as a writer. It's not really until, very shortly before she dies where she becomes famous as the artist that she is and celebrated for the achievements she made. Although she was certainly quite popular amongst her artist friends. Okay, so let's look at the plan for today's episode. We're going to get the image onto the canvas. I'll show you where to download the template. Then we're going to stain it. We'll talk about a few different ways we might want to do this. Then we'll talk about, while that's all drawing, that first layer of paint, we'll talk about her biography, maybe in a little bit more depth. This is the second Emily Carr painting we've done, but the first one in a long time, and kind of before I was doing some of the more in-depth biography. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And this painting is probably her most simple painting that I could find. So ideally, we should be all wrapped up in about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So obviously, there's the timestamp chapter playlist down below, which you can jump to in order to find the places you want to go. If you're watching the video after it's recorded, if you're watching it live, well, unless you've got a time travel device, you're stuck just watching me do it in real time. And while I kind of just mentioned this, if you want to support the channel, consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell so that you know when upcoming videos are going to happen. Let your friends know, take a photograph of the artwork that you make, and upload it to our Facebook group. This group keeps getting bigger day by day by day, and this is where when people upload pictures to it, not only are you part of an awesome community of artists, but once a month I go through the files on the Facebook group and I do a feedback episode where I give some free information to help people improve the work they're working on, including the paintings we do in class, as well as artworks that people are working on their own. Another thing that is really, really helpful, and I mentioned this at the end of last week's episode, is if you go back to previous episodes that have already aired and leave a comment on one of those episodes. That is really helpful. There's been a number of you that have done that already, and I thank you so much for doing that. If you want to support the channel through a small donation, you can consider leaving one through the PayPal. There's the YouTube chat function where you put your comment in. If you see a little dollar sign, that's how you could leave $1, price of a cup of coffee, or contact me through the Facebook group, my website. All those links are down there below. Lots of info, right? Okay, so let's go right to our first step. We want to get this image onto the canvas. Now, we could just draw this and do our best to sketch it out. It's not the most complex image of all time, but one thing that might save you a little bit of time would be to download the free template from the Dropbox. So there's a link in the description below for the Dropbox folder. If you click on that, you're going to go to this Master Study folder, and you'll see at the very top, these are the all of the supplemental materials for the very first 5 episodes, showing you kind of how to mix a color wheel, what paints to buy, all that kind of stuff. And then these next ones that are have letters, these are all our most basic paintings. Paintings that a beginner painter can paint, I think really no problem, or at least simplify even more based on what we're doing. And here's where we're going to be at 00Y Emily Carr. And then all of the numbered ones that go down here for till like, what, 150, these are all maybe a little bit more complex images, including like the Mona Lisa and Salvador Dali, Vermeer, all sorts of crazy stuff in there. So let's go look here, Emily Carr. You'll see that there's 4 files in here. Let me just kind of review what 4 files those actually are for you. You've got the original image, you've got the outline as a JPEG and a PDF, and then a little cheat sheet with some information on mixing colors, which is pretty close to what we're going to do in class, maybe even a little bit more simplified. So you can always just, if you're like, I'm tired of listening to him, you can just download this and go right to work. So, as I said, we can take this outline that's here in the Dropbox. You can print it out onto regular photocopy paper using your inkjet laserjet printer at home, and let's show you how you can transfer this image. So here it is printed out, and then here is a canvas board. This is one that I've ordered online through Amazon. You buy like 24 of them for 48 bucks or something, so they come out to about $2 a piece. I like these better than the ones you get for $1 a piece at the dollar store. I think they are superior. The other thing that I do is they come gessoed, and gesso that's what makes it look white. They come pre-gessoed, but I like to add a second coat of gesso. And I've talked about that in one of the very first episodes of our How to Paint series there. So you can, if you're like, what does that mean? How do you do that? Well, I do a whole demonstration on how to do that, so I'm not going to go too far into it now. But then once I've put that gesso on, I let it dry, and then I sand it. So now what I'm doing is I'm just taping down my template onto the canvas, and I'm going to use some carbon transfer paper. You can use graphite transfer paper. They're pretty much the same thing. And then I'm going to put this in between the outline and the canvas. You'll notice I've used it many times, and I'm putting the shiny side down, right? The shiny side has got the graphite or carbon on it. The dull kind of wax paper side is the side that you want facing up. And sometimes I've used, probably the first 100 episodes here, I used double-sided carbon paper. So it doesn't matter if it's two-sided, one-sided. Obviously, two-sided is kind of a little bit pointless because it just goes onto the back of your template here. Now, I'm going to go pretty quickly with these lines because a lot of these lines are going to be covered up by paint as we get going here. So with these like trees, I'm just using this just to kind of get me into the ballpark here. If you're watching for the first time, I've never been really interested in doing exact replicas of these paintings. And So if you're working on your painting and you get excited by a color or something, go right ahead and change the colors, change the composition. I think I mentioned once my grandmother, she said, Michael, your paintings would be, imagine how good they would be if there were little baby faces all over them. Imagine your landscapes with baby faces. And, you know, I think about that, and sometimes I think maybe that is the best idea I've ever heard. It's maybe not, but maybe someone out there is going to take that idea, run with it, and become an internationally famous billionaire for making landscapes with baby faces in them. If so, please send a small donation in honor of my dear grandmother for the genius idea. So you can see here I'm just doing maybe every second line, really, because I only use these templates, these outlines, to help me get the painting in roughly the right place, right? That's all I need, right? I just need the composition to be relatively sorted out so that I'm not worried so much about, like, the structure of the painting, the drawing. I can just really focus on color. And I think most of the time when people are making a painting, you know, they fret about things. It doesn't look right. And it really doesn't have anything to do with painting. It's really a color, or sorry, it doesn't really have anything to do with painting. It's actually a drawing issue. And if you're interested in getting to become a better drawer, there's an entire 45 episode how to draw course that I did here on YouTube. It's free. It's somewhere there on my web page or on the YouTube page. Wow, look at all the people here. We got Paula and Heidi, Maya, Kathy, the white wasabi. Awesome. So let's we've got this here. Let's move on to our next step. We got the image on the canvas. Okay, so the second step here is to stain the canvas, or what the Italians, since even before the Renaissance, have called the Imprimatura, the first layer of paint, or a priming layer. Lots of different artists do this in various different ways. I'll explain to you the way that I'll do it in a moment. But even before I get there, I just want to make mention of the paint that I'm about to use. This is the Amsterdam brand of paint. I'm not paid or given anything free. I buy them just like you guys from a local art supply store. But I do think this is probably your best bang for the buck. If you're a beginner artist, you can use this paint. We've done this is episode 245 paintings using this brand, and it works, right? So you're guaranteed to get pretty much the same results as I am if you use this brand. However, if you want a higher grade, professional quality paint, here's golden. This will do fine. It's going to be about 3 times the price for half as much, right? So you decide if that's worth it, but it is better quality. Then you got Liquitex, Winsor & Newton, Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supply, Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, Daler Rowney, Vevacryl, and this is used primarily in India and China. Novacolor is a mom and pop business down in Los Angeles. Chromacolor here in Vancouver, similarly. And here's a brand that's a brand in Toronto, which I don't recommend because they seem to have added white into all of these colors for some reason. So if you try to make a black, as we will do today, it'll go gray instead. I don't know why they did that, but that might explain why some people have difficulty mixing black. If you're using any of those other colors and you notice similar results where you cannot get a black doing exactly what I'm doing in class. It's probably the same situation it is with this brand of paint, and I would love to know what it is, because these are my recommendations for all these different colors, but I haven't necessarily used them for these paintings. So this is just me looking online at their data sheets, trying to figure out which one would be the most appropriate. Okay, so let's get this painting started. I'm gonna have to, oh no, I did. Let's get our paints out here. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my Amsterdam paint, my warm yellow, to stain this canvas. Now, I'm actually going to put a couple of coats of paint on here. But you could condense these next 2 steps I'm doing into 1 step. I'm just going to do them in 2 steps just because, just for a matter of consistency, as I've been doing all these years and episodes. But you could turn this into a bit of an orange. But I'm just going to do the yellow first, and then I'm going to add a separate layer of paint. And are we going to notice the difference? Probably not, to be quite honest. But it's, I was trying to think, like, what is the difference? It's probably a little bit like the difference between, when James Bond says, shaken, not stirred for his martini, right? I don't drink, so it's been maybe, I don't know when the last time I had a martini was. If you can actually tell the difference in taste between a shaken martini versus a stirred martini. I'm sure some people will say yes, but those are probably people who are, experts or big drinkers. So, there we go. And, I've talked many times about why I apply a color here like this. Traditionally, artists would usually use a brownish, a reddish brown color. This is my own thing, using this warm yellow. I don't think anybody else does this, but it's something that I kind of just did as an exercise many episodes ago, and realized it kind of got 95% close to what a more complex method would do, and the difference is so negligible that I was like, you know what? I think for most beginner artists, and even people like myself who's been painting for 25 years, good enough. Or as my grandfather used to say, good enough for government work. Okay, so I'm actually going to, let's put that aside. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, as this dries, I'm going to mix a kind of the second part here. I'm going to again use, I'm going to mix it to the side. Maybe let's scoop out some of this wet paint here. So again, I'm going to put some yellow here. Is that going to be enough? Let's get a little bit more. I'm running out of my red here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a little bit of a warm orange. So I'm going to take my yellow, and you can see this time I'm not using white. I want something that's got a little bit more thickness. I'm going to add some of this red in here. And let's just see, actually, let's go back to the original and just see how much of a how much orange we really want to make this painting. Okay, so you could like that's pretty good there. The thing is I'm going to dilute it. Instead of water, I'm going to use matte medium in here, which is going to make it a little bit more transparent. If I add water to this mixture and then apply it over top of this thing that I've just painted, what is likely to happen is I might actually just like clean that yellow that I've just applied off, and it's just going to be a big mess. So I'm going to stir this up. That's pretty good. Now, because it's going to be a little bit more transparent and I'm going to paint it over the yellow, the thing it tells me is that this is going to look more yellow when I apply it on here than it is currently. Now, this is still a little bit wet, so what I'm going to do is just hit it with the blow dryer and dry it off. Okay. Okay, so that is why I wondered to myself, is this going to be enough? I'm going to say it's enough. It's possible that I might run out halfway through. I might have to remix it, which could be a bummer. But what it would force me to do is try to mix that color again, which is very difficult, but it's a great learning experience. If you're really, really worried about it, you can always make more. I always sort of, as maybe it's just, I'm a teacher, I always just think, hey, that's not a problem. It's a learning experience or a teachable moment, I guess, right? Okay, so I'm going to smear this on. So it's sort of like I'm staining this again. And so the reason why, again, I could have just done this all at once in one quick step right at the beginning. One of the reasons why I like to kind of break it down into two steps is that, I really like that yellow, and I really like it when that yellow just sort of pops through different layers, as it is even here. So now I've got a little bit of orange over top of a bit of yellow, and there's little bits of that yellow kind of coming through, and that's just an extra little bit of a layer of complexity that just makes someone who's really curious, stop and look a little bit more closely and carefully to be like, what is going on down on there? It's, what's another example? It's sort of like if you get, like, you can make your own peanut butter and jam sandwiches or jelly sandwiches, or you could buy that pre-mixed peanut butter and jelly that all comes in one jar. Does it taste the same? Probably. But is it kind of nice to be able, if you like, I kind of just want a little bit of peanut butter today and a lot of jam. I like being able to control the mixture myself. So anyway, so let's let this dry. The white wasabi, did you see my drawing? I think I did. I wasn't able, I saw it after we did our feedback session, so I haven't had a chance, so I wasn't able to incorporate it into our feedback episode, but next episode I will. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Awesome. Okay. Let's take a look, at Come on. Okay, so while this slowly dries here on the canvas, let's take a look at the life and times of Emily Carr, Canada's most famous artist. And, you know, while I'm saying that, I think to do a little humble brag on behalf of all Canadians, I do think it's meaningful to me anyway that Canada's most famous artist just so happens to be a woman, right? I think that's something that I think is worthy of celebration, a little pat on the back for Canadian culture, because that's probably a rarity, right? I don't know. I'd have to really think about it. I'm probably totally wrong, but it's probably that's not the that's the exception to the rule, I would suggest, right? Okay, so Emily Carr, born in 1871 and dies in 1945 at age 73, and so she was. Her parents were British, English citizens, came to Canada, and were probably enticed to come out west with the promise of free or very inexpensive land, as it was, you know, during that, because at the time they moved there, British Columbia was just literally established the same year that Emily Carr was born. And Emily Carr was the second youngest of 9 children, so her mom was very busy, and she's born literally, I think it's like 28 years after the city of Victoria was established. And back then, you know, it's growing, but you can, and I don't know the statistics of like the population, but I imagine when she was born and growing up, you're talking about her living in a town of maybe 20,000 people, which still is not small, but it is compared to, like, you know, probably where her parents are from England, and getting on a sail, or not a sail, well, maybe it was a sailboat, yeah, from London, you know, city of millions of people. This would have been quite the culture shock, right? Because Victoria at this time is just a very small community surrounded by dense forest on a really, you know, right on the peninsula that faces the Pacific Ocean. So let's just kind of do a little dive in here. So here's Victoria. Let's go. Whoops. So here's Vancouver. This is where I am right here. And Victoria is actually a little bit further south than the American border here. And you can see there's Seattle. So it's a short ferry ride from both Seattle and Vancouver, kind of right in the middle. And then let's zoom in even further. Oh, too fast. Okay. So I want to kind of point out a few things. If you've ever visited Seattle, or sorry, not Seattle, Victoria, you have to go to this little area, where the government buildings are, and the Fairmont Hotel. There's a lot of like beautiful old buildings and shopping in that neighborhood. And so that's really the old part of Victoria. And her family home is right here, the Carr house. This is right close to this Beacon Hill Park, which is this beautiful old, you know, large park right there in essentially downtown Victoria. Lots of weddings always happening in their picturesque place. So the Carr house is on the corner of Government and Simcoe, and there's tours you can go in. This is her childhood house. This is where she was, I don't know if she was born in the house, but certainly where she spent her childhood. And then later on, she, because her parents died when Emily was, her mother died, I think, when she was 15, and her father when she was 17. So her oldest sister, Edith, I believe, was the basically took the rest of her siblings under her wing and raised them as her own. So this was probably quite a large property, and it was subdivided into 5 lots, I believe. And Emily, later on in her life, moved into this house, which is, right next to the park itself. And by the way, there's a really great little drive-in here. If you're ever in Victoria, you got to go get a milkshake from Beacon Drive-In, right? Little plug for a little great mom and pop burger stand there. Not too many of them left these days, right? But, there's lots of information on the house, and it's a historic building. They were recently not restored. They were recently restored, I think, in the 70s and then 90s, to bring them back up to try to return them to the state they were in when Emily was growing up in both of those houses, or growing up in the first house and then later living and working in the other house. What else do I want to say in here? So before he died, Emily Carr's father really encouraged all of the children to pursue various different interests, particularly more creative pursuits. And Emily really was absorbed into art and to drawing. And after he passed away, her sister continued to foster that interest in art. Shortly, was it 1890, so really about a year and a half after her father dies, she goes to the San Francisco Art Institute, where she studies for the next couple of years. And that is kind of a major turning point in her life, when she's, she's the age of most of my students at Emily Carr University, where I teach now. And I think that just sort of, going from, again, we're talking a town like Victoria, even by 1890, might have 60, 70,000 people, to San Francisco, which is now the largest city on the West Coast, a booming metropolis, the New York City, or the Paris of the West, as they would have called it at the time. So that would have been I'm sure, super exciting for her to be in this very metropolitan space after growing up in a relatively rural community, essentially like an outpost on the far side of the world. That would have been quite the experience. Also because right around this time you have, there was the gold rush in the San Francisco area in 1849. That's long over, but now they're starting to find gold up in Alaska and Yukon, and you start to see like a lot of people gravitating to San Francisco to then take boats up north into these places to pan for gold. So it would have been a really exciting time to be in San Francisco. You would see boats coming and going constantly. Also commercial trade to China and Japan. So it would have really felt to her just like the whole world is opening up. She comes back to Vancouver for about 6 years, and then after that, or while she's in Vancouver, she makes her first trip to an Aboriginal village that's right next to Acrylic on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Let's see if we can show you where that is. Let's see, it keeps zooming way too... Okay, so here's where she... Oops. Goes too fast. So Acrylic is like, even to this day, is a bit of an isolated community. But so she goes up to this area, and she encounters and spends time with the people that live there, and who are now referred to as the Nootka people, or in English as Nootka, but the Nukalut. I'm sorry, I shouldn't even try to pronounce that. I'll just butcher it. But That she considered to be sort of a major turning point in her life, where she really recognized the not only like the beauty of the art that people made and the kind of a totally different way of life of the indigenous people, but also I think she was very much aware of how that lifestyle was changing radically, that the world around them was had already changed, but was really in danger of disappearing. And I think that was, profoundly sad and disturbing to her. And I think she felt for the rest of her life some urgency to try to capture and document the lives and culture and customs of Canada's first people before they were, they're already being pushed to these reserves far away from where their ancestral territories were, off into the margins. But there's dying from disease, some of which were done deliberately. The famous blankets that have been poisoned. But that, I think, is it's hard to really underestimate how that first experience for her changed the course of her life. So then she goes to England, where she studies at the Westminster School of Art, and she after that she then returns back to Victoria. And does a trip up to Alaska with one of her sisters, which is actually documented in a book that was recently published. Let me see. Do I want to try to find that? Emily Carr, Alaska book. Sister. Okay, yeah. This is actually a surprisingly interesting book. Like the illustrations that she does in here are very different than probably most people's conception of what Emily Carr's art is. Let's see if there's any of these drawings a little bit larger. So it was this sort of book that was just sort of kept around in the family home. But so you have these illustrations that remind me a lot of one of the very first comics. Is it The Yellow Boy, I think it's called? Anyway, this is it's probably a little bit more for Emily Carr files, I guess, than the majority of people. It's a little bit more of a niche document. But if you're really into Emily Carr, this is kind of a must-see here. My sister and I in Alaska, and documenting that whole experience. It's also very fanciful, as you can see that there's bears that are dressed up walking around, etc. Let's see. I also forgot to mention, when she made her first visit to Ucluelet and the indigenous people that were living nearby, she was given the name Clewick. And Clewick translate to the laughing one, or the one who laughs. And I think that tells you a lot about Emily Carr right there, right? Very perceptive nickname that they gave her, because Emily Carr, she is or was a extremely unique person. She was a total iconoclast. She was a proto-feminist, if there ever was one. She never married. It's hard to know if she had what relationships, romantic relationships she had, if any, throughout her life. She did have some really important friendships with some male artists, but she spent most of her life, especially the last few decades, not alone. She, as I said, she was, in communication with people all the time, but she just was on her own path. She was like, I don't need a husband. I don't need a partner. I don't need anybody to keep me happy. I'm just going to do my thing, and I want to do my thing. I don't want anybody telling me what to do or where to be at any time. We'll talk about the pets she owned and her pretty unconventional lifestyle here in a moment. But suffice to say, she, at that moment, like that, she was just somebody who's very bubbly, had a lot of energy, clearly laughing and finding everything quite humorous. And I think being in a community where she probably found it quite hard to communicate. You know, if you've ever tried to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak your language and you don't speak theirs, there is a lot of like awkward laughter where you're like, I'm not sure if you understand what I'm saying, right? If you've ever been traveling and had those types of conversations in a pub or something. And so I think that for me is really important. And it's no surprise that later on she names her first memoir Clewick, right? Because this book, which is a great book and won the Governor's General Award in 1941 and catapulted her from relative obscurity into national attention, at least in Canada, where she's being interviewed on the CBC. And this is, again, just a few years before she passes away. She becomes famous first as an author, right, for her memoirs. And then she starts printing a lot of books that she's written. She's written all these journals. She really spends the last few years of her life as an author. And she's exhibiting her paintings, but she's making fewer and fewer paintings. So the painting we're about to do is really one of the not the last, but amongst maybe the last few dozen paintings that she ever does produce. Let me see. Another big moment in her life. So she sort of has these periods of education where she goes to art school in San Francisco, kind of around 19 years old, goes to school in England about 28 years old, and then goes to Paris at the very end of her 30s, 39-ish or so, right? And she studies in Paris at l'Académie Colarossi, sorry, like l'Académie Colarossi, which is right in the middle of Montparnasse, and that's, you know, this is 1910 when she's there. This is right at a year or two before Picasso and Braque, who are living just down the street from where she's living, invent Cubism. At the time when she's there, this is the heyday of the avant-garde movements. The main avant-garde movement that is really popular at the time is called Fauvism, and the leader of the Fauvist movement is Henri Matisse. Matisse, who later on is sort of known as the main rival between Picasso. Matisse is very famous for having produced, at this time, in fact, maybe I should just bring up, let's just open a little tab here. So Matisse really makes a name for himself with these very boldly colored paintings. And they're shocking to everyone. Like, this is happening. So you have Impressionism in the 1880s. Claude Monet, who we just painted, what was that, a few weeks ago. So we did one of Monet's water lilies. The main next big artist to follow in the movement that becomes known as post-impressionism is Vincent van Gogh. And Vincent van Gogh takes the speedy application of paint and the really obvious use of, we see the brushstrokes, there's no intent to hide the brushstrokes. And then Matisse takes all of that to the next level, where he's now being super bold with even more bright colors, even more bold brushstrokes, and simplifying the figures even more. And so Emily Carr's right there in the epicenter of where all of this is happening. And when she returns a couple of years back to Victoria, she's really the one of the only people on especially the Canadian West Coast that has seen most of this work in person. So she becomes sort of like you know, people are like, what was it like? Did you meet Picasso? I've just been reading about this guy. Or I heard there's this movement called Fauvism. What is that? So she's kind of this source of information for the local art community. You know, I forgot to mention that sort of the period right before she went to Paris, she did have her own art studio here in Vancouver. And I just sort of curiosity looked up this this space, and so it's at 1465 West Broadway, which anyone who's living here in Vancouver, let me just back this out here. So this is the location of it, which is very close to Granville Island. It's on Broadway, basically Broadway in Granville, which is a pretty big intersection here in Vancouver. But it is the location basically right there of where they're building a giant new subway station. So let's just go back out here, because I just find this. I'm a huge history buff, as you might be able to tell, and so this is what Emily Carr's studio, which would have been right about there, looks like today. And if you watch this video a few years from now, there'll be a giant complex here. Incidentally, if you live in Vancouver and you remember, this used to be the Memphis Blues barbecue joint, which I've been into many times, and I just today realized that was Emily Carr's old studio. Let me see, what else do I want to just mention before we jump into the paintings? So a couple of other little things. She also forms a pretty strong relationship with an American artist who lives in Seattle, or lived in Seattle, called Mark Tobey. Mark Tobey he's sort of one of these anomalies in art history, where he's sort of doing Jackson Pollock paintings, but painting them with a brush 30 years before Jackson Pollock. So he's a kind of an early proponent of abstract painting, and these aren't really the best examples of Tobey's art. I'm a huge Tobey fan, and for me, I just think it's like, whoa, that's pretty wild that Mark Tobey was one of Emily Carr's dearest friends. And you know, I think they had a lot of conversations about art and abstract art and some of the art that they had both seen in Europe during their various different travels. And that is, there's been some exhibitions in the past talking about the relationship between these two people and how they influenced one another. The other major relationships that she had were with three artists, potentially more, but who later founded the Group of Seven. So you have Edwin Holgate, A.Y. Jackson, and Lauren Harris were three of the Group of Seven, of which there were more than 7 members of the Group of Seven, although, we're going to look at all 10 or 11 of those artists over the course of the next few months. But you know, as Lauren Harris himself says, like, she was one of us. They really considered her to be sort of an honorary member of the Group of Seven, and I suspect if the Group of Seven hadn't sort of folded in the 1930s, that she would have been a member of the Group of Seven, and she, in fact, exhibited with them in exhibitions that they organized. I'm not sure why they didn't just make her a member of the group. I suspect, even as open-minded as those fellows might have been back in the day, there might have been a little bit of sexism there, like, I don't know, if we let a woman into this group, we're really gonna be diluting the, you know, this. Anyway, so I don't know the whole story behind that, but I'm sure there's someone who can correct me. The other thing, I just want to move on, before I do move on, it's worth just kind of briefly talking about her relationship to Aboriginal art, Aboriginal culture, and because there's nowadays people's some of these works that she made, of which, let me see if we can find some. Yeah, are there's Emily Carr, are sort of to be considered really crossing the line or straddling the line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. So one of the reasons why we have not painted maybe some of her most famous paintings, which do depict some of the totem poles and various other artworks, longhouses and canoes that were carved by Aboriginal people, is because it's a little bit of a sketchy gray area to be painting or reproducing images by Indigenous people, and especially over the past maybe 5 years, that is extremely controversial here in Canada. And so, as much as I admire some of these works, there is a lot of people trying to reckon and deal with the you know, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and yeah. So in fact, another just really interesting thing, just before I move on as well, is this painting, which was once called the Indian Church, is in the collection of the Art Gallery of Ontario, which has just renamed this painting. Let's see if we click on it. Do they have the new name for this painting? And that was literally just changed a few years ago. They have changed the name to Church at Uquat Village, even though that's not the way that Emily Carr referred to it, or it was always referred to as the Indian Church. But here in Canada, Indian is considered to be a pejorative term. I know in our brothers and sisters down in the United States have a different feeling about that, but anyway, so that's also been very controversial. In fact, there's Aboriginal artists here in Canada who think it should return to its original name because it's this sort of whitewashing of history, and that it's important for us to not erase that history, but to keep it there so that we can have conversations about it. I'm sort of on the fence there. I don't really have any opinion either way. I think it's just kind of, I'm fascinated by those discussions, and it'll be interesting to see how, 50 years from now, how all that plays out. Okay, maybe I should mention just right here at the end that Emily Carr passes away in 1945, and she's buried in just a few blocks, well, not maybe 10 blocks from where she spent the vast majority of her life, in Ross Bay Cemetery. Oops, come on, this thing is so hard to zoom. So Ross Bay Cemetery, and then here's her plot there, which is right at the corner of that Arnold Avenue and Fairfield Road. And we'll just sort of show you, if you're interested in going there and paying your respects. There's sort of three kind of monuments to her. There's kind of like, or not monuments, placards or stones or markers for her, because she's also buried alongside of many of her siblings as well. So let's see, this is sort of the main one. Oh, just before I do move on, is I mentioned she, for kind of throughout the 1930s, lived in this trailer or caravan that she coined the Elephant, that she could cart around and have transported, and that she would live and use as her art studio. So, because often she's living towards the end of her life, not in Victoria, but she would go on these trips outside of town and live for months at a time, as members of the Group of Seven had done in Algonquin Park, etc. So she's often, there's a sculpture of her outside, or kitty corner to the government building in Victoria, with her and a couple of her dogs. I love that she had 3 dogs, one named Flirt, another named Punk, and another named Lou. I mean, Punk, I didn't even know punk was a word back in the 100 years ago. What a fun name for a dog, Punk. As well, she also had a pet monkey named Woo, and at Emily Carr University, where I teach at, the student newspaper is called Woo, in honor of Emily Carr, or of her monkey Woo. So this is another book. Again, there's books. She's so popular and well known that people have written books about her dogs and about her monkey, right? And we looked at her original book. Okay, so let's get into the painting itself here. I think we're ready to move on. Oh, and Kathy says, yes, great books written about her and by her, about her life. Yeah, there's also lots more books. She I think there's about like 8 or 9 books and they're upstairs. I was planning to get them all day, and of course, anyway, you can find them at your local library, I'm sure. Okay, so the next step is potentially doing an underpainting on our painting. Underpainting has lots of different meanings. An underpainting can be combined with the Imprimatura, which we did when we created our painting by Berta Morisot, one of the most important Impressionist painters, who also happened to be a woman, like Emily Carr. But we did, I did 2 versions of this. Oh, here's the other one. Right, and this one I started with the yellow, as we started here. And this one I started with a kind of more traditional rusty red Imprimatura. And you could see, is there a difference between these two? Yes. Is the difference super noticeable? If I just showed you that, and then I showed you that, would you be able to tell the difference? I'm sure there's somebody's, yes, I can tell the difference, in fact. Yes. But most people can't, right? But one of the things I did in that episode, which I did just a few weeks ago, Berta Morisot's Peonies, is I sort of combined the Imprimatura and the underpainting into one step here. I think for the sake of simplicity for today's episode, I'm just going to move forward. Although, let me just think how she would have created this. Well, you know what? Now that I'm looking at it, maybe I do want to do a little bit of underpainting, just for the sake of just demonstrating maybe how I think she might have gone about making this painting. So, yeah, here I'm going to squeeze some paint out onto my palette. One thing I think about is, if you're watching the video long after it aired, you can always jump to the end and take a look at my palette, and you could see, like, oh, he didn't actually use any red at all. They stayed totally unused. And then you go like, okay, well, he squeezed a lot of paint out there that he didn't use, so I'm not going to put any of that paint on my palette. Because sometimes I use a lot of one color, sometimes I use none of another color. But I just squeeze these out anyway, so that I have the option of using them. And then whatever paint I don't use, I put on here to my painting by J. DeFeo, The Rose. We did this episode, a year ago almost. And you can see this building up all of that texture. This is where all my unused paint goes at the end of the day. I love this. Oh, it's so fun to touch, right? My daughter, when she comes down here, she's all over it. She just, but the only thing is she picks at it. She likes to try to take little globs of paint off. And speaking of which, you can see me peeling these little bits of paint off. I used to throw these in the garbage until I was doing this. And what I've done here is I've actually buried these in here. Sometimes I cut them into little pieces. So rather than just throwing these in the garbage, it's like, oh, well, I'm trying to build up texture. Why don't I just chop these into little pieces, and then I've got some actual paint, and to just make it stick, I just mix in more paint and stick it right onto the canvas. Hot tip for today, right? Okay, so I've got my paint on here. Let's mix. I'm gonna do this on this other little palette here. I'm just gonna mix a little bit of a different color here. I'm gonna take some of my blue. This is my cool blue and my warm red. And I'm gonna stir that up. And what this is gonna get me is kind of a dark brown kind of color. If I wanted to make this black, all I would need to do is add some cool yellow into the mixture. But I think I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to have kind of a nice dark brown. And you don't need to do this. I just think for our purpose, just seeing maybe how Emily Carr might have painted this painting could be interesting maybe for somebody. So let's move this up here. So obviously Emily Carr would have been painting this painting from probably on site. She might have done a sketch of this place, or might have just sketched directly onto a panel. And I think this is a piece of cardboard that she's painting on. So she might have just kind of started, as what a lot of artists might do, is start with your horizon line and just sort of get that in place. And then I think she probably would have done a few trees. You can see how I'm holding the paintbrush too. I'm not using my smallest brush, and I'm not worried about making it perfect. So I bet you there's something like that going on. Oh, I forgot the stump here, so maybe I'm just going to paint this little stump in here. Or you know what? Looks like that stump is a little bit further over, so if you have something like that, what I can do is try to wash that away quickly. I don't want to rub too much, or I might rub off my yellow paint. I'm just going to leave that there. I'm worried if I keep on going, I'm going to tear that away. So I put this in here, and then I realized where I was painting was right there. So I'm just going to move that over. Let's just put a little bit of paint here. A little bit of paint there. Oh, she's got some kind of little... Right, and I think that's probably it. I think that's probably how she would have begun this painting. I don't think there would have been any pencil lines on here. That's all stuff she would have added next. But, you know, if she's standing here in a field on Miss Jones's farm making this painting, she probably is just really quickly figuring out, okay, where's the basic composition here? I'm going to put in a few lines describing where the trees are going to be. These are where some stumps are going to go. And then I'm ready to continue working on it. So I would bet you at one point her painting looked pretty close to what I've got here. And you can see, like, there's this little... Another reason I'm showing you something like this is that it's not a big deal if you make a mistake. We can clean that up. I can hide it completely and you won't ever see it. Or sometimes artists like to kind of keep a little hint of a mistake there. The French call it erasure, in the sense that we still see evidence of something that was there, but the artist had deliberately kept it. It's almost like a little bit of an acknowledgement I've talked about this when I was talking about Picasso, like doing it deliberately to make people aware of the of the of the artist's presence, and that there's more to see than you might originally believe at first glance, because that might add a little bit of mystery. It might make you think the artist is maybe smarter than they actually are, etc. The White Wasabi says, I live in Victoria. That's cool. You got to go visit the Emily Carr house, right? So let's move on to our next step. So our next step is to start putting some color into the background. And really, I think this painting was done very quickly. So we don't want to overdo the background. Which is going to be kind of tricky for some people. When you say, oh, you don't need to put a lot of paint there, they think, oh, that's really easy. And I think we've seen in the past, sometimes when there's not a lot of paint on, each brushstroke has to have meaning, and therefore it can be a little more deceptively difficult than one might imagine. And it becomes a little bit more like painting with watercolor. So what I want to get is this color in the sky. So that color in the sky is a cold blue. It's a blue, and the reason why she's using a cool blue in the background is because your cold colors appear to recede backwards, and warm colors appear to advance towards you, or towards the viewer. And that's a technique we've talked about many, many times. So if we look at how to mix that color, we could just paint this directly onto the canvas. In fact, let's just do that just so you can kind of see what that looks like. I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit too dark, maybe a little bit too bright. So I'm just going to wipe that away. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of white to this color. Now, the one thing, if I add white to that color, it's going to become really opaque. So let's just see how this works now. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Let's just wipe that off. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to add a little bit of matte medium again, just a tiny bit of it, so that we're sort of like kind of splitting between the middle here. I want to have a little bit of this blue. I want to have a little bit of white in there, but I also want to make it a little bit transparent so it doesn't cover up all of that orange that was underneath it. So this is, I love using matte medium. Some people will use water instead of matte medium, which is, I'm always discouraging people from doing it. If that's all you have, that's okay. But I think you want to try to just be, if you can, if you already got acrylic paint, investing in matte medium, I think, is probably the thing your next purchase is. That's what it should be. Or it could be gloss medium. I'm a big fan of matte over gloss whenever possible. That's just a personal taste. I'm sure there's probably people watching right now who are like, ugh, I hate matte. I love glossy, reflective paint. I find with acrylic paint, glossy tends to make acrylic look quite plasticky, because after all, acrylic paint, when it dries, essentially turns into plastic. So usually people want to try to avoid the plasticky kind of look and want something that looks a little bit more like oil paint, which generally has a more matte quality. Although, again, we can make oil paint look very glossy if you want. Okay, so now that I've mixed my paint up here, what I'm going to do is paint just some little brush strokes up here in the sky. I want to try to keep these relatively distinct. You know, in hers, they kind of merge together in places, but I'm going to start with them a little bit further away. Now, what's happening here, let's zoom in. As you can see, it's getting really transparent. Maybe a little bit too transparent. So let's just go back into here, just get a little bit more paint on my brush, and just go back over some of these. The good thing also about using matte medium is you can put lots of thin layers down. So if you're really worried about committing too much paint to a painting, matte medium or gloss medium, again, is your best friend, because you can really kind of manage the ratios much more carefully. Let's back out a bit more. And let's go over here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take just some white paint. I'm not going to, you see I haven't washed my brush because there's a little bit of blue still on there. I don't mind that. Again, I'm going to put a bit more matte medium in here. It's quite a lot. And let's take a bit more white. So this next bit of paint is going to be much lighter, not nearly as baby blue as what we were just painting with. And I'm going to paint this through here. It also sort of looks like she's doing a bit of like staccato brush strokes. Some are bigger than others. What I wanted to do, though, is try to avoid covering up all of my orange in the background. Now you can see, because it's so transparent, my pencil lines remain visible. Which may or may not be acceptable to you. I don't mind it at all, but if you really want to hide them, then we can just add more white into this paint. Okay, so let's just zoom out and just see how we're doing here. Now I look at this and I think maybe it's gonna wipe some of that away. I might end up painting a little bit more orange back into those places. I don't know. I'm not totally sure yet. I'm gonna take a little bit more white, in fact. There's a few places I kind of want just a little bit more opaque. Maybe is that too much? You can see that it covers up my pencil lines much more. I don't want to overdo it. I'm just going to do a few more. And then I'm going to leave it. You know, I always say that until I get more paint on the canvas, trying to get, let's say, the background perfect is sort of a waste of time. Because it's very hard for me to judge what that sky looks like when, you know, 2/3 or more of this painting, 3/4 is incomplete. So that's why I would talk about doing a first pass of a color rather than just background, right? Because I want to do a little bit more in the foreground and middle ground before I really claim to have been finished with my background. Okay. Now, let's move to a next step here. So now that we've got the background started, let's move to our foreground. And in this case, the foreground is really the majority of this painting. I mean, we could do the middle ground and then the foreground, but for our purpose, I'm just going to collide them into one. So the next thing I want to do is I want to move into these trees that are in the background, or middle ground, I guess you could say, right? So what colors are we looking at here? And there is, again, a little bit of the same color in the sky, but that's where we'll get to next. So this color, we've got both cool blue and warm blue together. So we've got, and it's kind of a bit of a purpley color, but it's not a, a super saturated purpley color. It's a little bit more of a muted purple, right? If you want a really, really saturated purple, what we would do is we would use our warm blue and cool red, and we could mix that and get a much brighter blue, or purple. Instead, what I want to do is I'm going to use my cool blue, and I'm going to start, let's start with, I wonder if I'm going to mix my cool blue and my cool red together. Because I'm worried if I mix these two together, it's going to be just way too dark. So I want something that does a little bit of pop, but not too much. So, and this is why it's helpful to mix your color chart or color wheel before you paint, right? So I'm going to take, let's do this right here. So I'm going to take my cool blue, let's take a bit more of it. Cool blue and cool red together and mix these two. So now I've got a pretty good purple. It's not the most saturated purple I can mix, but I think it's going to do the job just nicely. And you could see, it's pretty much bang on to the color we want. It's just a matter of the ratio between red to blue. The more red we get in here, the more kind of, what would you say, kind of crimson it's going to look, versus the more blue we add, the kind of darker the color will be, and obviously the more purple it will be. So that's, I think, pretty good. One thing, though, before I paint this, again, I'm going to add a little bit of medium. Now, when I teach this in person, I don't usually add the medium, but I just want to show you that this can be helpful, because if we look at her painting, the paint is a little bit thin. It is almost like a watercolor. And I think this is oil paint on board or cardboard. So you can dilute oil paint just like you can dilute acrylic paint using medium. So let's start off. Here. Okay. Now, I should also say a big part of Emily Carr's style and approach to painting is very dynamic brushstrokes. And we can see her brushstrokes. She doesn't try to hide her brushstrokes in the same way that Leonardo da Vinci tries to hide his brushstrokes, or Frida Kahlo kind of hides her brushstrokes. Here, Emily Carr, she's full on into, like, again, her sort of best friend is Mark Tobey, who's, one of the most important abstract painters in American history. So he's all in, all he's painting is brushstrokes. He's not painting images, he's just painting paint, right? So think about how that influences her approach to painting. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm using, maybe I'm going to go to a little bit smaller brush. I don't really have, let me see. That's a bit smaller here. So this is, again, this is a flat brush, and I'm going to kind of sweep in. And by painting the way that Emily Carr paints, we really get this feeling of movement. Right, here's another. All of these lines that are sweeping around here. Let's do that again. In fact, you know what? I'm also just going to take a little bit of white. Not much, because that white is very opaque. But I want to add here just to lighten that color and make it a little bit more opaque so that it's not so dark, because this purple, when it gets on top of this orange, darkens significantly. And maybe that's almost too much. It's a little bit too much. So just to kind of combat that, I'm just going to mix more paint into my mixture to dilute that white a bit. Okay, just a little bit more solid, a little bit less transparent. And just see how she like kind of follows. You know, it's when I see this, I think of like wind blowing through the forest, and that this is less an illustration of trees as it is wind moving through trees. And if you think of that, just I think it really might change the way that you appreciate her paintings. In that there's trees in there, but she's kind of seeing beyond the trees, the kind of the elemental forces that that sort of dominate life on islands and communities that are, you know, further away from metropolitan places. Right. So let's move here. And don't worry if this color's not exactly right. Like I'm probably going to paint a little bit over top of some of these brushstrokes anyway. Just realize that I'll go all the way to the other corner here. And now this is the opposite. So where everything was sort of curving towards the inside on one side, the other side's going to come the other way. So now I'm going to paint. I hope it's easier to rotate your canvas to kind of capture that feeling, because the brushstroke looks different when from where it starts to where it ends, right? There's a different kind of feeling to it. Okay, so let's just take a look and see how we're doing thus far. Okay, so let's say we want an area here to be a little bit darker, a little bit more black. Should we do that right now? Well, you know what? Let's make our green first before we darken that area. So the green we want to use again is we want to use a cooler green because it's in the background. So I'm going to take my cool blue and cool yellow and mix that. And whoa, what a fun poppy green! But boy, oh boy, that is really green. That's a real bright, intense green. So while I love that color, it's almost a bit too much. So I'm going to take a little bit of my cool red and add it to this color, which is going to kill a little bit of the intensity of that color and turn it into a brown. Like, well, if I add too much of it, it's going to go brown. So I just want to be careful about adding too much. So this is a great way. If you add the opposite color from on the color wheel to a color, you're going to pull that color towards the middle. Now that starts to behave a lot like a warm yellow and warm blue, which we're going to mix eventually here, because they're basically getting very close to the same place, right? So what we started with is we used cool yellow, cool blue, and mixed sort of maybe this color. And then I added some cool red. So I basically am taking this color and pulling it towards the red. So now it's starting to kind of, it's probably right about there. You can see that if I just mixed warm blue and warm yellow, I'd be kind of there. So they are very similar, sure, very similar properties at this exact moment. Likewise, I'm going to take just a little bit of white, and I got to be careful about putting too much in there. Take a little bit of matte medium, mix this in. And then let's paint with this, and let's see. And I'm painting right over top of other lines that were there. And the cool thing with doing this with a little bit of matte medium is those layers just start to combine with one another, because we can see through them the different layers of paint here. So I'm just going to paint. I mean, we could just do one big wave all the way across. I mean, this is, you know, once you've got those waves on it, it's kind of fun. It's almost like you can go for a little ride across the surface of your painting. Take a little wave. Right. Go all the way up and down, and up and down, and across and around, all the way to the other side. So you can see I've left little bits of orange poking through here. And that's so that it still gives me lots of opportunity, like Emily Carr had, to darken and modify things there. Okay. So now that I've got this here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a warmer color for my foreground, right? Because so far we've basically used mostly, if not exclusively, cool colors, right? Cool blue in the sky, and then cool blue and cool red for the purple, and then cool yellow and cool blue and even cool red for this green. Now what I want to do is I want to add some warmer colors, because the warm colors are going to appear to come forward, right? And we want, and by using warm and cool colors to create space, that's going to create the illusion of depth in this painting. So let's take some warm yellow and warm blue. Let's mix these together. So what this is going to give us is a very grassy green, right? And it just depends on how much blue you put in here. I'm going to put a little bit of white again. And once more, I'm going to put a bit of matte medium in there. Okay. So now we can do the majority of the grass here with this color, and it's just about making these very dynamic brush strokes. Now some of these are a little bit thin and transparent, so let's kind of up the ratio of paint here. Maybe I'll do a few with this a little bit more orangey, yellowy paint here. Notice I'm not doing everything, and see, that's very, very light. I don't know how well it's showing up on camera. It looks great on my side of things. It looks a little weird on the TV that I'm previewing it out on, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to add maybe a little bit more blue into this color. I'm just going to kind of do a little bit more, go back over, kind of in between a few of these. The secret is variety and not just using the same color throughout the entire painting. And let the colors kind of mix a little bit. Right now, really, I just feel like the wind just whoosh. Right? It's just such a dynamic picture. What an incredible artist. Okay. Just looking at that, thinking what else I might want to do at this stage. Well, you know what, what I want to do now is I want to take some of this green that we made for our background and kind of mix it into this color for the foreground. So I'm just going to take a little bit more of my cool blue and cool red. It's like, whoa, that's pretty electric. And I'm just going to kind of blur the boundaries here, mix them together, so that I've got a little bit of my warmer colors in my cool colors as well. And then let's add this into here. So now what we've got is lots of different greens in this painting. And I don't know about you, but I love that variety of all these different colors kind of vying for our attention here. And because they're just a little bit transparent, they reveal the color that's underneath, and rather than hiding them. And so they mix together and complement one another really well. Okay, and in fact, I'm going to add a lot more yellow here because she's got a few that are. There's a lot of yellow in there, so let's mix a bit more yellow in there. You know what? I'm going to add a little bit of white and yellow together. And you can see, like, I'm not looking desperately at the original for reassurance here. And yeah, maybe it's because I've been painting for a long time. But I encourage you to allow yourself to kind of just get lost in the painting and not worry so much about making a perfect reproduction. Because, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm not a robot. I don't want to be a robot. I think being a person is really cool, and part of being a person is our own unique weirdness and strangeness and the way that we do things that might technically be wrong, but I think the wrongness is what makes it right. Okay, I'm going to avoid, again, completely filling this up. Maybe, you know, I'm going to take a little bit of this color while I'm here, and I'm going to go back into the background and just add a little bit of this color, maybe in a few places. Okay, let's take a look at those side by side. Okay. I like how this is turning out. I like where we're at right now. Sorry, I'm getting spammed by Russian bots again. I'm sure it didn't help to have made anti-Putin paintings. Put me on the watch list. Okay. I wonder, do I want to do the houses or stumps and things yet? Let's look at the original. I think I'm going to do a little bit, yeah, let's do a bit of these buildings here and the stumps. Let's maybe start with the building. I'm pretty sure that that building's got a bit of a warm color to it. So I'm taking some white and warm red. I'm actually going to take just a little bit of cool blue, add that in there, because again, it's going to just kill a little bit of the brightness and warmth of that red. And we'll see, maybe I need to, I went too far. In fact, maybe let's add just a bit of yellow in there. I just need a bit more white. Oops. I'm going to use that same color to paint a few little windows here. Let's just use the same color to get this other building. Again, I'm not too concerned about making this color perfect right now because I can always modify and change them. So I think there's another building kind of right here. This is actually, the reason why it looks a little blurry is because I scanned this from a book. I couldn't find like a really good high resolution version online, so I got a book, but of course the page happened to be right in the middle of the book, or the image in the middle of the book, so let's look at the stump. I'm going to take a bit of more white and just mix it into this color for right now. I don't mind if it's not going to be the exact right one. We see that there's, this is interesting, this is like a little fence or something, or the pathway in front of this fence. Okay, I don't want to do too many details there because I don't think I'm quite ready to do that just yet anyway, but let's So the thing that I want to do now, and I encourage you to do looking at your own painting, is I'm going to look at both of them and squint my eyes. I'm going to look at my painting, and I'm going to look at the original, and I'm going to look at them with my eyes almost entirely closed, because what that's going to do is going to help me see the difference between them, especially the difference, the contrast of value, right? And that can be really hard to do when we just look at them as, you know, on their own without squinting our eyes. But by squinting my eyes, it becomes much more clear here where the darker areas of the painting are, right? It makes me like, okay, these need to get much darker right in here. This needs to get darker right in here. That needs to get darker right in here. It needs to get darker here. Sort of like a little shape here of darkness, and then dark down here, right? So that it helps me kind of see what areas need more paint and what areas I'm like, okay, got to be a little bit careful there about overloading those places. I mean, worst comes to worst, I can just paint orange back over top of anything and it'll be like it was never there. But, you know, if you can get it all done in one go, which is I'm positive Emily Carr did, then that's even better. So, speaking of which, let's move on to another step here. So now that I've got the painting well begun, I want to go back to the background and I want to finish off the sky and determine, because now that I've got the foreground, some colors in there, I can now more clearly see the relationship of the background to the foreground, and I will be able to judge whether I've got the colors right or not. Right, so there's my original, my version of the original, sorry, and let's see them side by side. Okay. What do I think about this blue up here? I think I want to make it maybe a little, I think what I want is a bit more blue in there and maybe a little bit less opaque. So I'm just going to take the same color that I used before. I'm going to put a bit of matte medium in there. Let's get this on my brush. A little bit of white. Don't need much of it. And then let's see. Like basically, you can almost be painting the same color that you were just painting into this area, and it's just like doing a second coat of that color. And, you know, I am deeply compelled to want to add a little bit more. So I am going to add just a little bit more sky and a few other little places. It's not what she did, but my painting is already a little bit different than hers anyway. And for me, I feel like I just need a little bit more blue up in that sky. The other thing that I want to do is I'm going to go back to this color that we used for the trees. I'm going to take a bit of that, and I'm going to bring this into the blue, the kind of the white that we were using previously. I'm going to bring this in here, because we see a bit of that same color right here, right? Kind of, it's almost like it's rising up out of the trees. It's kind of very subtle, different kind of blue, which is a bit more purpley. kind of going over some of my lines that I felt were a little bit, my pencil lines that were a little bit too visible. I'm going to leave that there. I might go back over that in a bit. But the other thing that, the more and more I notice here, I look at it and I see what appears to be sort of like yellow and white there that I didn't notice. I've painted this many times in classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cool yellow and white. Let's mix that up pretty good. And maybe majority yellow. I'm also going to take matte medium because I don't want it to be too strong, too opaque. I want to thin that out quite a lot. And let's see how well this works here. It's a little bit too transparent, so maybe we need warm yellow instead. Let's mix that in. Maybe that cool yellow, I think it should have been maybe a warm yellow this whole time. Let's take a little bit of white, warm yellow. I'm thinking actually we need some warm yellow. Tiny bit of warm red, a little bit of an orangey quality, and a bit of white. That's, I think, what I want. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to come across on camera all that well. It does look very similar to what I was just painting. I think it, you know, in person, I think that it's working. I'm not so sure about on camera. Maybe too, I'm gonna, let's paint with a little bit of, just a bit of white. You know, and as I said, like if I just paint white right out of the tube onto that background, it's just going to be way too white, right? It's going to be too visible. I want something that's got a little bit more subtlety to it. Okay, I think that's probably enough fiddling around in that area. Am I happy? Yeah, I think that's okay. I might, you know, well, we'll see. Once it's, again, it's always hard to make a judgment before the painting is you know, when it's still in a incomplete stage to know exactly what needs to be done until you see it all together. So I'm going to move on to the trees again. Oh, let's, yeah, I'm going to put up a, okay, so now I've got the background, I think, done enough. I'm going to work on the foreground, including these trees, and we'll get very close to being finished probably in another 20 minutes or so. Okay. So, I'm taking the purple that I had made before, and you know what, actually, I'm going to make a black. We haven't made black yet, so I'm going to take my cool blue, my warm red, and my cool yellow, and I'm going to mix these together. So let's take our blue and red, mix that, and start mixing some yellow into that. And if I get the ratio right, I'm going to get a black. So it's going brown right now. Let's get more blue into there, and then it's going to go darker and darker and darker until we're pretty close to a black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this color, mix it into my purple now. I don't need a lot of it, but I want to just make that, I want to have a darker purple. So let's zoom in. And maybe it's worth, I'm going to go to a smaller brush now to get kind of some finer details. Back to a little bit of a bigger brush. See how I can kind of, I'm not erasing things I did before. If I'm using a different size brush, I can kind of preserve a little bit of what was there. Might do some other greens and things over there. I'm just gonna keep on going. Maybe was this too dark? Might have been too dark there. I'm going to kind of paint in between some of those other lines that were there. It's really dark right in between, right in behind these houses here. Okay. use a bigger brush to get to mimic. So she's sort of complementing and at times kind of contradicting existing brush strokes. Okay, got these tree stumps here. This might be too early for me to put little details like that, but I can always paint them back if I paint over them, right? No big deal. Okay, let's zoom back out. And now if I squint my eyes, it's starting to get darker, right? That's the goal. I want to do this. I'm going to use the same color in the foreground. The difference is I just put a little bit of matte medium here. So I'm just going to take my brush with that same color on it, mix it into a little bit of matte medium. That way it's not going to be just too intense and bold in the foreground. I can build it up to whatever density I want here. It's going to be a bit more transparent. How's that? And that line isn't really there, but I kind of just felt I needed it. Okay, so again, I'm squinting my eyes when I'm looking at them. I have a monitor with both of them side by side, so I'm just seeing how that works. Now, I'm going to just take this same color, and I'm just going to kind of go mixing colors around to darken different things, because now I'm going to take this color and I can take a little bit of my black, a little bit of this color. It doesn't matter. The more kind of weird mixtures that I'll never be able to remember how I did, again, is perfect for this kind of thing. I want to create nice little harmony of different colors on this canvas here. So now I'm kind of lightly painting over some of that orange, but it's not hiding it completely. It's still there, but it's just getting darker. Just darkening all that down. So what we're sort of doing is sort of you know, creating the density of foliage in the forest here and giving it that dark, heavy thickness that is quite kind of an iconic part of her paintings, where the trees just sort of seem like super solid clumps. Okay, let's do the same thing in the grass in the foreground. Just continuing to darken and layer. And maybe I'll even just take a bit more matte medium here, just to thin it out in a few places where I want there to be green, but I don't want it to be just a big heavy blob. Like down here. And it takes some restraint to like not cover up all of the orange that's here. I want to keep little bits of it coming through. Okay. I think I want to do a little bit more of this dark color up in here. There we go. So some lighter stuff, darker stuff, just going back and forth. Maybe right here I'm going to take a little bit more of this lighter blue. Might have done a little over the top with that. Let's get a bit more. Not warm red, but cool red here. Okay. It's going to take more warm yellow, warm blue, and just add a little bit more of this. Now that I start to kind of build it up the surface, subsequent layers of paint are going to be more opaque and cover up more, because they're not having to fight over top of the warm yellow or the orange that we put there originally. Okay, let's get a warm brown going here. So I've got my warm yellow, warm red, and warm blue to mix this warm brown. And I think there was a little bit of white in there. It's okay, I just want to darken it down just a bit. So I'm going to take this dark brown, just clarify that shape. So this is sort of like right underneath the roof. If I want, I can add just a little bit of black to darken that even more. Let's take, I'm going to take this color, let's get some more red in here, and white. That's a little bit closer. Yellow. I'm going to take some warm, or some what was this, cool yellow, a little bit of almost green in there, and some white. Need a bit more white in there. All that out a little bit. Again, maybe remember I said I might have done some of that stuff a little bit early. That's okay. So we can get this little kind of hill that pops up there. Again, all these things are just details I didn't really notice until I really look at it carefully. So usually I'm done 20 minutes ago when I'm painting in class. But that's why I love doing these episodes. Is as I look at a painting, I start seeing more, I appreciate more, I really understand more of how an artist is working. So let's back out and see. You know, obviously I'm kind of splitting a little bit of hairs here. I don't need to spend so much time on these little details, but I also just love doing it. So I'll do just a little bit more. Okay, I'm pretty close to being done here. In fact, so let's just do a couple little finishing touches, and I think we'll be done the painting. I think we're very, very close. Just little tiny details. How about the overall thing? We'll take a look at them side by side, and then we can kind of decide whether, you know, how much more we really do need to put in here. So if I squint my eyes at it, I'm much closer. I feel like I could still go even darker. I could push that black a little bit more. So let's do a little bit of that. I'm going to take my black, mix it into these paints. Okay. I think I'll just leave that black as that is there. I could really just fiddle endlessly. I want to get clean this up here. Okay, now I want to do just a little bit of kind of white grayish things here. Let's get some white on there. Maybe even take a little bit of my black. Some matte medium. Transparent. I want to take a bit of white just on its own. Let's zoom in. Let's just... Okay. And let's take our black. Just gonna make it darker gray. Take my black, mix it into that white. We got get darker, don't they? Darker, and then they start to curve. Oops. Okay, let's just see here. Oh, you know what I forgot is the white or slightly off-white kind of blue. Let's take some cool blue. I'm going to put it right in the center with some white. This is going to be a little bit transparent for the tree trunks here. And let's see. Just very lightly. Even that might be a bit heavy-handed. I'm going to get this black but brown. Take my black and my warm brown, mixing them together to get this one. Okay. I think what I want to do now just before I finish, I'm going to take a bit of just my warm yellow. And I'm just going to go over top, maybe. Of some of this, the white that I painted there. It's going to have the effect of just kind of taking some of the whiteness off and just turns it into yellow. Okay. I think that's good enough. So it's that time to do a quick side-by-side comparison before we sign off for the night, and we'll zoom in and take a little bit of a look at how things went, and I'll give myself a little critique. Before we do that, just consider liking, subscribing, hit the notification bell. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving a comment down below in the comments. Take a photograph of your artwork and upload it to our Facebook group, or join the Facebook group first, and then upload your photo to our Facebook group so that in a few weeks we can take a look at it and I'll give you some feedback so that you can make it better, right? And if you really found this of value and of interest, consider leaving a donation as little as $1 through PayPal or the Super Chat function directly here in YouTube. Contact me through the website, etc. Thank you to all of those of you who continue to support the channel. The computer, the cameras, all of that is through your generosity. So thank you so much for your continued support over the years. Okay, so let's do a little side-by-side. So, on my side, my orange looks almost a little bit intense, but it could just be the colors of the camera. Because when I look at it on its own, and I look at the screen, I think I've got it pretty much bang on. But when I see them side by side like that, it looks like my orange is a little bit more intense. But that could be the saturation of my video camera a little bit higher up. I think everything is there. I think she's done a much better job than I have about really creating distinct spaces in these trees. Like, I feel like I can see that these trees are behind this clump, and that tree is closer to me. So that is something that's not entirely uncommon, when we're doing these episodes, because it's sort of a copy of reality. And so sometimes we lose a little bit in translation, that if we were painting directly from the scene, we would more consciously make those decisions and choices that aren't quite here. So it's not surprising that it's almost every painting we've done in the series, there's always a little bit of the simulacra is not quite perfect, right? There's something a little bit missing. But all in all, I'm pretty satisfied. Let's zoom in on a few things. Let's start in just the top left corner here. And maybe Okay. I mean, you can see her subtlety in here, whereas I'm much more heavy-handed with those big brush strokes. I don't mind how I've painted it. Just, it's not, she's one of the greatest painters of all time, and so I just have to take a little bit of, keep that in mind, that, I'm tackling a great painting by a great artist here. I'm happy-ish about the way that I've applied paint in here. I like that the thin, transparent layers of paint work pretty well to capture that same sort of feeling. Let's Same sort of thing. You know, the colors aren't exactly right here because I was sort of deliberately just going about my own business and kind of adding what I felt I wanted there, as you should do as well. Or sorry, that was bottom right corner. I didn't put her signature there. Interestingly enough, she often signed her name M.E. Carr. And I'm trying to remember what her actual first name is. Now that it just occurs to me that I don't remember what that is. Let's go up here, climb up into the sky. There we are. Yeah, that orange is not nearly as yellowish as it appears on screen. But, you know, excuses, Michael. I've maybe painted that tree a little bit darker than she did. Maybe I could have put a few more little trees in behind there, but close, right? I mean, a number of things could have been done differently, but I think good enough, right? Okay, everyone, thank you so much for painting along with me. I hope you learned something today about one of the greatest women in Canadian history, alongside just a handful of other people that, you know, have made a greater contribution to Canadian culture than Emily Carr or society in general, and certainly by far the most famous Canadian artist, and she happens to be a woman, right? So we'll see you guys on Thursday of next week. We're going to be looking at another artist associated with the Group of Seven, not a member of the Group of Seven, and neither was Emily Carr, but had an influence on the Group of Seven, and yeah, often exhibited with the Group of Seven, etc. And anyway, we're going to be looking at the art of Tom Thompson, and I think that'll be a great start to launch us into the conversation of who the Group of Seven were, because they formed almost in honor of Tom Thompson after he died mysteriously in Algonquin Park in 1917. So enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you guys next week. Have a great night, everybody, and upload your version to the Facebook group so we can all celebrate it. Good night.